Hi, this is Hank.
Hi, Hank.
I'm so sorry that I'm so ready joining this call, but it is a standing conflict for me, and today I have a cancellation. So hi.
Does someone have the link to the requirements? It was a markdown file. It's not in the history anymore. I lost it.
Okay.
It's in the invitation to the.
Oh, okay, cool.
I can put it in the thing as well.
So Mark will not be here for the first 30 minutes. That's probably everybody's aware of that.
So we lost the boss.
Well, I think what we can do is everybody's pretty clear about this draft which is shared in the chat, which was shared by um, earlier by Mark as well, and we've done some review internally as well. So everybody's recommended to go through that. But in the meantime, I think there has been some work done on the identification of the gaps. I was doing it as well, but I just noticed that whatever I had, pretty much similar content was generated by Jens. So I was thinking maybe, has he joined? Is he on the call? Not yet. We can run through the document. He's done a gap analysis, good gap analysis. Maybe I can share that and we can go through over the gap analysis and try to debate whether we all agree with that or not while Mark joins.
Sounds great, Yosh.
Yeah, let me quickly. Just give me a sec while I need to think. Yeah. Let me share my screen. I have got the document open. So this is I'm just trying to enhance the resolution here. Give me a sec so that. Where is the zoom on the Google Doc? Yeah, I got it. So, okay, is it clear now? Is it visible? So he has. I was really would love him to present this because it's his work, but as I couldn't see him on the call, so I'm just trying to kind of fill the shoes. So
Yogesh,
maybe, yeah.
Yogesh, someone was asking whether I can post that link into the chat window as well, or is that only accessible for you?
No, it should be accessible. Just give me a sec. Yeah, I can't see once I'm sharing very little, I can see raised hands request on the chat. So thanks, Hannes, for kind of. So I pasted the link on, pasted the link. If anybody is not able to view it, then please view my screen because I'm going to scroll down. So yes, Vimsy now, assuming that this is the current draft as of today. So it does mention about workload identity components with core blending blocks of trust domain, which effectively is the kind of authority or the organization responsible for the identity. And there is and the workload identity is expressed as URIs as complying to RFC 3986. And there's a credential associated to the identity, which is either in the form of a JSON web token or X.509. This is coming from the IDF workload identity working group, attaching a credential to the identity. And I have not dealt much with the authentication mechanism, so how the service to service protocol, which is actually now been getting modified by Yaron to talk about workload to workload protocol. So maybe Hannes, you
Yeah,
can add.
it's actually quite simple. Because you want to. So if you think about regular OAuth, all you do is you establish a TLS communication to the other party, and then you present the bearer token to that party, and then based on what's in the bearer token, you are given access. But of course, bearer tokens are not the most secure thing in the world, because once you have or someone gets access to the bearer token, they can do whatever is set in the token. So the idea was long time ago already was to associate that token, the JSON Web Token, with a key, and then you additionally need to present not just the token, but also you need to demonstrate possession of the private key that is associated with the token, and thereby it becomes it looks like his X509 certificate, just in a different encoding, in a JSON encoding instead of an ASM1 encoding. But then that proof of possession mechanism is in OAuth, is then used at the application layer. So there's an HTTP-based mechanism. And that's what this service-to-service authentication protocol basically describes, this application layer proof of possession mechanism. Using
this-
message signatures, for example, that is message signatures is an HTTP-based authentication mechanism. It sort of signs a couple of the HTTP payloads or messages, headers, and a couple of different things to bind the signature to the request. Is that good enough?
Yeah, just one question. This token has a life cycle as well. Does this JSON web token, because bearer token is only for that transaction. What happens to the JWT? Is there equivalent?
The JSON, the sort of like the bearer token has a lifetime and is bound to, depending on what you put into that token, it may be bound to a specific recipient and all sorts of other things. And the same is true for these proof of possession tokens. You can also they also have a lifetime, and they may be bound or only be used for specific recipients as well. So all of that still applies.
Okay, thanks. These are the kind of core concepts being advertised or being published by the Whimsy working group. And it's glad that Hannes is here. So he's also, you are active, Hannes, if I understand correctly, in that working group. So
In Whimsy?
yeah.
Yeah.
But Hannes, I have one question here. So when you are talking about the workload identifier, what exactly is that identifier that you are talking about?
Yeah. So the control plane that's or the infrastructure that starts these workloads and maintains them, like stops them and sort of configures policies for which workloads is allowed to communicate with what. It needs to have some identifier to distinguish one workload from the other. And that's what this workload identifier is.
Right, but if we talk about confidential computing scenarios, which I hope is the audience thinking about here, so who is going to assign that? Who is the signer of that identity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the documents, and probably that's also why we are looking into this. These documents were not really written from a confidential computing or confidential container point of view.
Yeah.
So there's obviously none of that is there. So yeah, so that's, I think, for us to find out.
Yeah. The Whimsy talks about an organization or a workload kind of producing organization which will have its name imprinted within the workload identity. Like in the URI, you will have an org who is responsible for those workloads. In case of even for confidential computing, I mean, still the workload is a workload, and it can even be transient. It can even migrate from one platform to another. So it becomes an interesting question. How do you bind that identity to the platform for only a limited duration of time? And because the workload can appear, it can stay, it can do its job, it can disappear. And that window of time when it is alive it can be across multiple platforms. So that's an interesting.
Yeah. But I would assume that is somewhat similar to, like, let's say a Kubernetes environment where you have a control plane and all that infrastructure, that servers who manage the workloads, or also in Spiffy Spire context, you also have these the servers who the hosts interact with to create their workloads. And so you need to have something similar there too in a confidential container or a confidential computing environment.
So can I raise a couple of things? I mean, firstly, I worry when we say things like have some sort of binding to the platform, because for me, confidential computing, the whole point is that we can avoid that in most cases. There may be cases where we do care about that, for geography, for instance. And of course, we do care about the trust route, if you will, because that comes down to a chip. But we shouldn't care about that chip. We should care about the endorser of that chip rather than the chip itself. The control plane may be the owner of that workload, but it may not be. It may just be the thing that's moving things around, and the owner of that may be completely different. So whoever is creating the attestation verification and assigning the identity needs to understand that and decide how that gets put together. And it can be fairly complex, but we shouldn't assume that it's the platform, and we shouldn't assume that it's anything to do with the control plane either.
Yeah.
So I've got a really bad cough, so I'm going to have to go on mute again. Sorry.
It's a fair point that there is some kind of an underlying policy which determines which workloads are allowed to run on which platform or which hardware, but that policy should not necessarily be expressed into the workload identity itself, I suppose, is a fair statement, I think.
I think the problem here is not only, let's say, relating that platform identity to that workload identity. The problem is that if whatever that, let's say, that environment is, if you do not have a specific identity which is identifying, so by identity I'm meaning something like host name. So if you do not have that, and the protocols that currently are used everywhere, so like RATLS, attested TLS, this TLS attest, all the protocols that exist, even the post handshake ones, the problem there is, how do you get that identity inside? The only identity that they use is the self-signed key. And the problem with that is that now anybody can generate that. And that if you do not have any binding whatsoever to any platform, or if you don't have that specific, you actually lose what the whole purpose of the thing was. You wanted to identify, first of all, that I'm really talking to Amazon.com. By the protocols that we have, you actually lost that identity, right? So you only know that I don't know which host I'm connecting to, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft, we don't know. But the only thing to provide you is.
But I don't care about that. I don't care about kind of connected to Amazon.com, the host. I care about connecting to a workload. And I don't care where that workload is being hosted. That's really actually very important, that it could be hosted on Amazon. It could be hosted on Azure, whatever. It's the thing that's doing the computation, the workload itself, that I care about. Now, I may care about the provenance of that workload, and establishing how that's been set up is absolutely important thing. But the fact that it's executing on Amazon is really unimportant to me. In fact, I want to be able to separate those. That's one of the whole goals of confidential computing, because we're isolated from the host. So now, if the owner of that and the initiator, shall we say, of that workload is Amazon.com, then fair enough, that it should be associated with them. But there's nothing to stop Amazon.com running this stuff on Azure's stuff. And let's take the example of Web3, right? So in Web3, I may be the initiator of a workload, but the application that's being run is not one that I've ever. I'm not the developer of it. The data sets that are being loaded into it aren't, again, things that come from me. The platform running it is one which I don't own or control, but I'm still the person, I'm still the entity with whom that identity should presumably be associated, because I'm the one who's initiated it. I'm the owner of that workload.
So Mike, I hear you that, but the problem is that when you are opening the door for, let's say, if any machine in the whole world is now broken, so that ruins out the whole process of attestation. That's the only thing that I'm trying to mention. If you limit the scope to, let's say, you were talking to Microsoft and you intended to talk to Microsoft, you are at least limiting it down to the machines that they have.
But no, attestation has to be the linchpin. The machine must never be the linchpin. The isolation of confidential computing away from the machine is the biggest thing that confidential computing brings. We mustn't be bringing it down to who owns the machine on which that is executing.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a correct goal to be. So as I said, so if you break any machine, any confidential.
What do you mean by break?
machine,
What do you mean break here?
So break here means losing the attestation key. So if any key, so anywhere in the world there was a confidential computing machine, you lose the attestation key for that. It is somehow compromised. Let's say there are several attacks, foreshadow and so on. So by any means using that attack, you lose that key. So it means now adversary can now divert that to that specific machine because you never checked at all.
No, that doesn't mean you should. That's a separate problem. That's a revocation problem, and we absolutely should think about that. It's probably not the main thing we need to think about, but it's a revocation problem. That is not something we should design into the protocol.
I think Mike is saying is that what level of importance should we attach to binding the workload to a specific platform?
We've got Catherine and Hannah's both got questions.
Sorry,
Catherine was first.
Sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, I largely agree with Mike here. I believe that there's also value being attached to which the provider is, right? Because if I'm, paying Google to run a Google VM, then I want to know that it's actually Google that's running it. So I'm not saying that that replaces, but these additional information will be helpful. Yeah,
Catherine, you're right. I care, but the people connecting to my workload probably shouldn't care, unless that's something that I want to expose to them.
agree.
Thanks. Hannah's is next, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering whether the definition of the workload identifier should then be modified in light of what we just talked about. It seems that there is some unhappiness about the way that those are URIs and potentially have these subject alternative names in case of X509 certificates. Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't know well enough.
I don't think. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if they are associated with the executing platform, then yes, they need to be redone, because as someone said very early on, there may be migration, quite apart from anything else, which is perfectly acceptable and securable, pretty much, if you're using confidential computing correctly in many cases. Hank?
Yeah, I understand the sentiment that the way how a workload is identified ideally should not have bleed in from the platform. But from a remote attestation point of view, of course, it is very important to understand what confidentiality things are provided by the platform or the hypervisor, the host, whatever. And so in combination, I think the customer, the user of a workload, wants to understand, is that a trustworthy thing that I'm talking to? And without an assertion, that it even can abstract assertion about its runner, the host, that's meaningless, I think.
Okay, so I agree. I agree
yeah.
with you, but that isolation is not a function of the host and the hypervisor. It is a function of the chip, the firmware, and the microcode, which are part of the attestation. The isolation should be absolute from that platform. In terms of confidentiality and integrity, we can't be sure about availability. Always been a problem. But that is not a function of the platform itself. It's a function of the chip, firmware, and the microcode, all of which are part of the attestation and not of the platform itself.
Okay, you're combined. That's very interesting because you said chip firmware something, and that is
Microcode.
not exactly the microcode. Thank you. Chip firmware microcode, and that is not the platform. That is an interesting statement because it's a component of the platform, I think. So
but it's separable and it's part. So literally, this is the book. Read the book.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I understand what you're saying, but for a device, so for identifier composition, I assume that there's some composition happening here. I think some of that, at least this triple that you highlighted, the three tuple that you highlighted, has to somehow go into that composition. And when migrating, you see, oh, workload, I re-identified, oh, but different three tuple, new different capabilities have to check. So that's I think what the customer wants. And if we can agree on that, I'm fine. The mechanisms.
Yeah, we need to be
weird, I guess.
Yeah, no, we need to be very careful about making statements about attestation because I'm aware that TDX and CCA and AMD do this all very differently. And I would beware of designing migration into our anything we do without in-depth technical interfacings and conversations with the members of those companies and any others who may be doing it, like Risk or NVIDIA, for instance. Osama, I think, is next.
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish between the protocols themselves and the requirements. And there, my point specifically is that what do we require to hold and what do the protocols actually provide? And that's an important distinction that needs to be made.
I agree.
That's very fair, actually. Yeah. I think we should focus on requirements here first, and then we say whether protocols is coming
100%, 100%. And I think that we're almost certainly going to need to rewrite protocols, as we have for TLS, for instance, to make the most of these things. Oh yeah, no, I'm sure that the IETF trust domain is not particularly well written. There's a. Let me put that inside.
Okay, so that's an interesting conversation, which is coming from the consensus from this group is that the workload identity, as prescribed by the IETF WIMSI working group, needs some modification coming from the requirements of confidential computing group, is that there should be some part of identity of the platform where the workload runs. Not, I should not use the word platform. According to Mike, it should be chip, bootloader, or whatever he said, firmware.
Yeah, it was chip, microcode, and firmware, not the bootloader, unless that's being injected, which should not happen in the first place. But don't get me started on that. It's different.
I think that because the confusion is happening because I think we in CCA world, or I think in TDX also, we use platform to represent precisely what Mike is trying to say, the chip.
Yeah.
And I think what Mike is worried about is people using the host or the hypervisor to be included in the platform, causing the confusion, right?
That's really helpful. That's a really helpful statement to make. That is exactly my concern. And thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Yeah. So that part of identity of the chip and the microcode and stuff should be part of the workload identity. which is an interesting ask. And I'm sure there would be some degree of pushback from Whimsy because they need to understand what is the relevance of that part, which is not directly controlled by the workload owner, as to say, as part of the identity, is something we need to kind of, will be an
Well, in
interesting discussion
Whimsy
in
so
idea.
far, Yogesh, we didn't really distinguish between platform attestation and key attestation and other forms of attestation. That's more RAT's topic. So that probably still has to, like, there's a little bit of room to
But
grow there.
true. What I'm really interesting to understand the feedback from Whimsy, because now we are actually really impacting their fundamental code definition of an workload identity based on our requirement, right?
No, I'm not. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think we can work hand in hand. We can consume whatever Whimsy needs as a minimal viable solution or minimal publishable unit they want to produce. And we go from there. Remote attestation can add things to well, they call it identity. We call it an identifier and build a new identity with it. Okay. That's not forbidden. And we can come to them and say, hey, look what we did. And they can like, oh my God, yeah, do that in RATs. Or they, oh my God, yes, that's nice. Let's do that here. So I don't think that's a hard conflict here.
Oh, okay. Got you. I think you are trying to kind of take it to one level higher as a new identity, which is a workload.
Yeah, exactly.
That's workload identity, let's call it.
Yeah. Let's composite trusted identity, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
So, and then we go from there.
That's an interesting thought. And I quite like that actually. Yeah.
Osama has his hand raised.
Okay.
Yeah, so would that identity be kind of orthogonal to the identity that they have? That's my question.
Not really. It's not orthogonal, but theirs would be sorry, yeah. Mike, you want to add? Go first. Yeah.
No. Finish that sentence. That's an important sentence I think you're about to finish, so please.
Yeah, so their identity is kind of subset because their identity is just kind of associating it to the organization or the owner of the workload. But ours will be a slightly richer identity, which has not just the owner, but the kind of the chip, microcode and stuff embedded into that identity. That's what my understanding is, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
That's really interesting. I was going to say subset. I'd say the other way around because ours is tighter, but I see what you mean. Ours is richer. I think that's a very good way of putting it. That's a good word that you use there. Ours is richer because it gives you much better understanding of the isolation of a workload from the rest of its environment, and therefore a much better ability to trust it in a lot of new ways, including its ability not to have that identity compromised, and to be able to maintain that and prove that identity to other parties. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting idea, right? So basically, I would agree. You just have more attributes. You did more attestation. You have more confidence, maybe. And, depending on how you want to construct that identity, these could just be additional extensions in that URI path or however you want to express it. But there could be, I could see a story there that seems sort of building on or extending rather than trying to change.
And Peter, just a follow-up question on your statement. Is the existing workload identity architecture allows that kind of extension in the base?
It's a URI definition if you talk about how the identifier is specified, it's a URI. And you can just keep it, like if you think about what that is, right? And how we use it in places like Spiffy, as you have more confidence and as you have more attributes, you can just keep adding to that URI, right? Various indicators of proof, depending on what your needs are. So, I think sort of in that sense, it feels extensible. I would also, like everything's extensible, right? Especially on paper. So and there's nothing that prohibits, I believe. I haven't read the text recently, but I don't think there's anything that would limit it. The Whimsy like even the Whimsy ID concept, it's very like the Spiffy ID, it's a URI, right? Yeah. Spiffy is kind of a subset it's another, I mean, that's another thing that you could think about is, right, it's, you get spiffy, you get whimsy colon, right? That's one class of identity. Spiffy is sort of another subset of that. Maybe there's a confidential compute version of that, right? If you want to adopt the pattern.
Sure.
Mark has his hand up.
Yeah. All right. So I want to inject a sort of a practical engineering sort of angle into this. Your workload measurements will be highly volatile. On the other side of it, of that whole authentication authorization dance, you have the relying party. The relying party will reason about the workload probably at some very aggregate level, right? I mean, your workload is probably complicated. It's probably a service. It has many components. The relying party ultimately doesn't care if it runs on SCV SNP or it runs on SGX or what data was compiled. All of that is part of kind of it's considered, but it's sort of hidden. The relying party policy needs to be structured in a way that is stable for years at a time, right? So we need to think about a couple of things. On one hand, how to make the ultimate workload identity stable enough that the relying party policy can be expressed in terms of that workload identity and not change for years. And on the other hand, how do we enable the lineage part, as in I'm looking at this particular workload credential that was issued in the last 24 hours. I need to be able to somehow link it back, into the, into some other system that might be able to tell me, it's not a relying party thing that's going to be happening, but some sort of auditor, some sort of agent that makes sure things are okay. So like in case of Spiffy, so Peter, you will know that there is an identifier on X509's SVID, but there is no such thing on the job, on the JWT SVID. So we will need to think about how, and this is why the gap analysis is
That's
there.
not correct, Mark. The JWT does have an identifier as well. The Spiffy ID is included in the JWT, right?
I'm just going by your bottom turtle document.
So, and in response to that, I would say I'm not sure who we is here. You say we need to do these two things, and I think that there's two different jobs here. One is the composite job, which I absolutely agree needs to be done, but I think where we need to probably focus our efforts to start with is to be able to provide the low-level composable description protocol, whatever we want to call that, which can then be used to create composite pieces, which is another job which probably needs to be another party. We probably want to be involved with that. But if we don't have that, the low-level granular piece, nobody can build the composite stuff anyway. And I think we need to do that first. That would be my strong recommendation.
I agree with Mike from a slightly different angle. Mark, you said the relying party doesn't care about which SCV SNP where it runs. How do you think, and why do you think it doesn't care? At the end of the day, it cares about the security of the workload, right?
It does. So let me give you an example. So the best example I can give you is in the X509 land, and it's called the issuance policy OID. So the type of thing the relying party might care about is that there is a subject, right? So this is my payroll application. And then it may have a couple of issuance policy OIDs. So an issuance policy OID might be, this is a credential that would only have been issued had the workload had been running in Germany. Okay, there's this this credential would only have been issued if the attester was subject to Department of Defense level 3 clearance level, whatever that means. So that it introduces this level of indirection. Right, so this way you don't actually care if it's SIV SNP or if it's SGX. You care that there is an intermediate policy that says this is what we require for workload isolation. We're going to formulate it in this very stable format that we're going to then present to the relying party, so that relying party need not change.
What I meant is, I think what you are trying to say is it just cares about the minimum security guarantees when the workload is run, and that may be expressed at one level up. A relying party may care, does my workload is running in a minimum security guarantee environment? I only care about that.
Well,
Right.
I guess I'm not exactly saying that. I am saying exactly what I'm saying is we have to structure the relying party policy in such a way that it is extra stable over time.
I think
Because
Osama
like
is next.
the alternative is an unmanageable system where you change something on left hand and now
thank
you
you.
have to go chase down 300 relying parties. And
So,
business
Osama, please
cannot run
excuse me
like
if I'm
this.
interjecting
please.
here. So what Thomas just said in the chat, this you are basically defining more trustworthiness vectors for authority, for attestation results for security actions. Because yes, the relying party does not care if it's an Intel or something or an ARM or I want to say other names now, AMD, so everybody's fair, risk. And then the qualities of the isolation, which are already captured to some extent in R4Z as trustworthiness vectors, they should be the thing that is digested by the relying party, and those are stable and digestible. And but the coming back to the remote attestation part, to produce those attestation results, you need to compose at least two things that you identify, and that is the chip firmware microcode 3 tuple from Mike, and a stable, long-term stable workload identity, plus maybe I think you were distinguishing, Mark, the principal workload identity and its instance identity, which can live for 5 seconds and then die. And that should be something, I think that was the lineage you were referring to. I was not entirely sure about that.
Right. Which, Mohammed, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to, I had a previous comment, but first continuing what Hank is saying. So what would be that exactly, that identity which is stable over time, Hank? So when you say that that's one part of that is the strong workload identity or stable workload identity, what exactly is that?
I may offer the way I see this. So we have really a two-leg dance. The first leg is the trust execution environment takes a bunch of measurements, highly fragile, highly unstable, and goes up to a verifier. The verifier goes and creates a bunch of attestation results. That's what we call them. And then the second leg, it can be combined with the first, but it doesn't have to be. The second leg is these attestation results are then presented to the identity provider that maps them into a format which is then presented to the relying party. That second leg produces the extra stable results. And the volatility is captured in the first two steps.
That doesn't
So
answer.
the way so, if I just may comment on that, the way I think of that is you've basically got something which is a bunch of microservices, but the microservices are composed into a system, and you care about the identity of that system. And that system itself may in fact be a subsystem of another thing. You may be, it might be that you've got a risk management system for a bank, and that is one system, but that's a subsystem of a larger system, which is also needs to be identifiable. So you might have multiple levels of composition, but the lowest level of composition is like to be something like a microservice or a container. And so I think, Mark, that is what you're heading towards. Is that fair?
I would say so. So again, the first step is you collect information about all your T's, about the composition. There is sort of this whole aggregation step. And then the second step is the mapping step. Now that we have all this information, can be presented in such a way that the relying party can remain oblivious to all the hard work we're doing.
Okay, that's fine. So you have a three-party model, which is fine. So you can have it that way. You could combine the two entities also. That's another model. But the point that Mike was mentioning. So if you are talking about the bank, so I want to connect to a specific bank and not to something which has, let's say, this measurement. I wanted to connect to, let's say, a Postbank and then not Deutsche Bank or not some man in the middle. So the protocols that we have currently are actually not ensuring that. That's why my question was not about so Mark, what you explained was the whole process. I know all that remote attestation process and all that. But the thing is actually what the protocol is actually providing to you as the verifier. So if it is not providing that, I am really connecting to the Deutsche Bank and not to the Postbank or not to the some man in the middle. So what's the use of actually ensuring that, okay, so this measurement is the one which I am talking to?
That may be up to Deutsche Bank. It may be that Deutsche Bank doesn't do the verification at the very lowest level. It may rely on another party to do that, or it may be an internal verification which is not exposed higher up. There may be what you might think of a sub-CA, which is never exposed. But if it's signed by a sub-CA, then Deutsche Bank is happy to expose to sign that at the higher level. So it's not necessarily the case that the attestation verification step from the composable, the lowest level components, is reflected up to the higher level components.
But at some point in time, you have to have that. So at some layer, at least, I mean, and I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, Deutsche Bank would need to do that.
Yeah,
right?
but how would they do that? So because
well, that's the composing. If they are the composing authority, let's call it the composing authority, right? Which is going to sign the system at the system level, right? They need to look at all of the components and decide whether they are happy to put their name, their identity, the thing you trust about them onto the main system based on all the different pieces.
But that has to be okay. So they, let's say they have a mechanism to decide that, right? So they have a mechanism. They decided somehow by doing something that they have a mechanism. How would that be transported over? So that's my main question. So even if they have some mechanism in place, they put in their identity deutschebank.com. Now the protocols actually do not support that. How do you provide the proof of possession of that specific identity?
That's a CA problem. We know how to do this. This is CAs, right?
So the CAs don't exist in the protocols. That's my point. So the CAs are now out of the picture. The protocols that we have currently are only ensuring that this is the measurement which I am talking to. It's not having any form of identity within that. So how I as a customer, I wanted to talk to Deutsche Bank. So even if the Deutsche Bank has now some mechanism in place to ensure me that this is really our identity, how does that get reflected back to me? It is me who wants a guarantee that I'm talking to Deutsche Bank and not to the man in the middle. But the scenario that currently the protocols exist is what they are saying is this is the measurement that you have. It's running on SGX, blah, 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 and all that. It has the latest, let's say, SVNs and all these things. So we have checked that and everything is perfect. But the guarantee that I needed to have was that I am talking to my bank. I'm not talking to man in the middle. So that
well, you trust the issuer of the credential. That's how you know.
Yep.
Who is the issuer of the credential?
Whoever you choose to trust for that credential. It could be VeriSign that issued this credential to Deutsche Bank. Like
it could be the German government. It depends exactly what you're looking for.
But that's not in the protocol. That's not, the protocol is not ensuring that. Who will?
We are standardizing something here. Or we are, at least I think we are accumulating the requirements for something that is a gap somewhere, I assume, very strongly right now. But I don't want to interrupt. I have a question, so I'm stepping back a little bit. Unless that explains it.
So the point I was making was, just to summarize that, is basically even if there is some mechanism which is there for the, let's say the bank example, again, the deutschebank.com to provide that identity within that identifier, there is no way that the protocol can actually export that and be sure that the key which was related to that specific identity was provided as a proof of possession. Somebody else could actually get that certificate and pretend to be that, because it's the CA, even if that CA certificate was signed, the protocol is not actually checking that identity. And it's not checking the proof of possession of that specific key which the CA had signed. It's not.
Which protocol is not checking that? Which protocol?
All the protocols, Intel's RATLS, interoperable RATLS.
Yes, see, we are talking about a gap. Again, I assume we are creating requirements and some gap analysis here.
Yeah. Let's record this as a gap. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I have recorded it as a gap. Yeah.
Henk and then Catherine, I think. Catherine's had her hand up as well.
This is a very naive question, so please excuse me. I've been a member of CCC for quite some time, and so don't laugh. Who is initiating composition? I think so much. So Mike was already talking about a third party. Mark was talking about another third party about the very stable, parts that is cutting away, limiting the volatile things a little bit. I'm wondering, of course, the three truthful things, the chip firmware microcode stuff, cannot look into the confidential workload and get its identifier. So an outside entity either has to do that and orchestrate that somehow, but also that identity has to talk with the workload. So my assumption is that there has to be a substrate in the workload that facilitates all this, right?
Yeah.
And
It's a very good point.
Absolutely. And you have a bootstrapping problem. There is
you have a bootstrapping problem.
Because
clearly,
Hannes and I were painting pictures for I think a few weeks now, and then more pictures. And the only thing that really made sense is the workload starts this. Maybe there's a better way to
some ideas. I have some ideas on that. But
okay.
Somebody's background music is running. It seems.
I think it might be Catherine.
Somebody's playing radio.
It's not music. We have some crosstalk from Catherine's connection sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I have no idea. I don't hear that myself.
No, we've got some crosstalk. I don't know what it is. It's something on the line, Catherine.
Oh, that's weird. But I'll be. I don't hear anything. But I'll be.
It's okay. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's okay.
I'll be muted after this. So just a step back. Like I'm trying to understand the overall goal of this working group. Are we trying to define, an architecture of how to compose these microservices to provide this stable identity, a workload identity, the architecture? Is that what we are trying to do here and try to standardize? That's how we want to, take all these attestation, having another microservice to consume these basic raw attestation and compose a stable workload identity that can be consumed by the relying party. Is that what we're trying to do?
I think there's two steps. I think before we do that, what we probably need to do is to create a workload identity mechanism, protocol, call it what you will, which is based on attestation and which will allow that composition to take place. I don't think we can jump into the second one. We need to be aware of what the requirements of the second one will be, but we need to do the first one before we can actually tackle the second one completely. Because if we don't know what can be called on at the composition step, then we obviously are not going to be able to manage that and make it work.
Yeah, I would answer.
I've got to go, I'm afraid, folks. This has been really fun. I hope I can make other ones.
But let me add something to your mic still really fast, because I think what the CCC definitely has to do is to define these digestible characteristics, maybe a fuzzy trust vectors that Mark was bringing up, that a relying party really wants. Not the confusing stuff. Exactly. And to identify the gaps and the requirements here. I think that is already super valuable. Yes. And we can spawn off in other SDOs documents how many we want. We can go to them, ask them whatever. But I think these two things are really valuable, I think, and that is something CCC can do.
You expressed it much better than I did, Hank. Thank you. I will see you around, folks. I've been really glad to have been here. Thanks a lot. I shall see you soon. Thank you.
I have an organizational question with a few minutes left. So much stuff was discussed. Again, I apologize. I had to be 30 minutes late. Are we keeping track of all the issues that we're raising? How to make sure that, they're captured, that we don't lose track of them? How we're doing that? I mean, this meeting is being recorded. I'm sure there is a summarization tool that could be run on it, but
I think that's an excellent point. We can adhere to that pull request which you merged last week as the repo, or what is the CCC standard practice? Shall we spin off a new project GitHub?
No, Yogesh, we cannot use that because it's the governance or the meeting.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I realized while I was stating that. So we need a new working area, which is where we can.
But that requires a charter. That requires a charter, which is the other document that I shared, which is a draft. As soon as that's approved, I think they'll give us a space.
Wait, Mark, one thing. So we have two options here. One is to spin off another SIG, and the other option is to create a subgroup in the attestation, the existing attestation SIG, which is, I think, lower friction in terms of spinning out the activity.
I ultimately don't care, but we do need a space.
But attestation
we need
may be slightly boxing down the
mailing
whole
list.
thing. I am not very convinced that putting it under the umbrella of attestation is the right way of doing this. But
What do you mean by right?
right
Well,
in the
it's almost
sense,
like emails, right? Do I want to read all the emails, just attestation emails, just a workload identity emails, right? That sort of, I would like to be able to filter the noise coming my way.
No, that's an orthogonal thing, because we can have a distribution list which is separate from the attestation SIG.
yeah, because this is all about workload identity in
That's
confidential
not a
computing.
problem.
It is not an attestation only thing. It is workload identity in context of confidential computing. I would put it like that.
Mark, I am leading two projects in the attestation SIG, and I have been contributing for, I think, several years, at least 3 or 4 years. I have never seen that there was any traffic whatsoever on the attestation list. So there were only, let's say, off and on there is an email, but there is never any conversation. I don't think that's something that you should be concerned about if you are.
No, the thing, Usama, I think the thing that Mark was raising is, what if I want a separate channel for sending emails about this topic, right? And we can create one. That's not a problem.
On the Slack, I have created this trustworthy workload identity working. We can always change it to confidential computing workload identity or whatever. But that just for the Slack. I want a similar stuff on GitHub as well under CCC.
Under CCC, what? There's no such thing as. So we cannot go with something under CCC without a charter, right? So you need to really make the exercise of going through TAC, creating the documentation to actually have a new project spinned off, which is, it's not trivial. It's, if we want to.
Why it is not trivial? I mean, may I know why it is not trivial?
Yeah, it should be trivial, right?
It should be trivial.
It's not the European Commission.
It's like launching, it's like what we did for Verizon. It's the same thing, same amount of paperwork.
Yeah, it's too complicated.
Project under the CCC umbrella.
Who is the authority whom we can talk and get this speed up?
No, there's no speed up. There's a process, right?
Yeah,
there's some paper that you need to fill. It needs to go through the TAC. It needs to, it's a longer process than just going via because it's a process is exactly like Verizon, and exactly like whatever other project exists under the umbrella of the CCC.
May I suggest that we could go with the creating a SIG route first, and if we discover that this is too much work, we can always resort to the lower friction one. I do feel that it might be worthwhile to stand up a separate one to have a focused discussion. That's kind of my hunch, but up to you, up to the team here.
Catherine, the thing is that we know what we need to do, right? It's not something that is unknown. Many of us have already gone through the process.
Yeah, and we are not. Sorry.
One quick comment on that, as you're deciding if you want to decide this through SIGs or WIGs or what you're trying to do. Generally, it just separates into a SIG is ongoing and a WIG has specific deliverables. This might fit better than that. It's all up to you.
We can draft a charter. We can say what we want from the group. That's not a problem, but it will take time. Thomas, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd like to minimize this kind of bureaucracy myself. But if anyone is happy to do that, I'm not. What I'm saying is I'm not going to do that. I've already done it.
So one quick question, Thomas. So can you quantify that time? So in your experience of Verizon and all other projects, like how much time did it take? Roughly, can you give
months?
Months, like how many months?
Many.
Half a year-ish. If everything goes well.
But there's a difference between project and SIG. I
Yeah.
thought.
SIG is treated as a project, Catherine. Yes, I agree with you. We might
Yeah.
have a different route for that, but there's no such difference.
Is there a SIG? Is there a SIG route which is different than a
No,
project
no,
route?
no. It's a project.
Oh, just for special interest also, you call it a project, is
So
it?
Sal has posted in the chat 3 to 6 months. That's
That is for project. Sal,
Yeah.
is the same answer for SIG as well, Sal?
SIG is a project, Yogesh. So yes.
That's weird.
And
Simply
in
weird.
6 months, believe me, typically it is. You know, we cross every T and dot every I double. So.
Is there a CCC? Is there a CCC SIG already? Confidential Computing Special Interest Group, General CCC SIG?
Of course.
We can continue working on the common top level CCC SIG and live there till the new SIG is created.
I don't know
So
what you're talking about,
for
Yogesh.
the SIG, we need a charter. So I think regardless of how we proceed, I think an agreement on the charter would be important, because
Yeah.
then we all are on the same page of what we're actually trying to accomplish here.
Yeah.
And then we can run this by Dan and basically say, look, decide which way you want to go. Ultimately, a SIG, as mailing list, a GitHub repo, and you know, a Google Drive. So not a huge uplift.
Yeah. And then again, there we can leverage other bodies to do paperwork, like, you know, write down architectures, models. I hope Whimsy does half of the work for us, to be honest. The rest can be done in Reds.
That's
And
very
we really,
optimistic of
we
you.
really have to be the steering of it,
yeah.
right?
I don't think so, Hank.
Yes,
No?
that's very optimistic.
No, come on. I think what would be, Atmos trivia aside, right? I think what would be very interesting is to get a sense of what people think a confidential compute identifier looks like. And it would be very interesting to then also, from an identity provider perspective, it would be interesting to get an understanding of what kind of credentials you would like to be produced by the identity provider. This attestation process, right, that's all proof that can be presented. But I think none of those things are really, none of those things strikes me as things that's necessarily specific even to Whimsy.
Yeah, I believe that. Some of it is remote attestation, maybe that's too specific for remote attestation. So I think the glue has to happen here.
That's rats, right?
Yeah.
That's absolutely rats.
Yeah, but the glue has to happen here, and maybe some parts go to Whimsy, some parts go to Rats, and then the value is added actually in CCC as a project. That seems pretty straightforward.
As I mentioned clearly, it's a confidential computing CCC confidential computing workload identity is the correct thing to describe this.
Right, and that could be to Hank's earlier point, right? Now, if that is a profile or an extension or something that builds on what other people do in Spiffy or whatever, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. And then,
And Hannes already presented to Whimsy with the remote attestation concept. One strategy was presented, I think, in a few slides, and yeah, maybe that's a starting point.
I have a concrete question for the group, which is, where do we track stuff? Because that's where we started this rattling, right?
We have a Google Drive.
Yeah.
So everything's in there right now. We
and we have a Slack channel as well.
There are tracking issues that we want to address, assigning tasks to people. This kind of thing is not, Google Drive is not the best.
Well, that's why let's approve the charter, and then we will be given the spaces for all of this. But for now, let's make shift, like, you know, put the issues in Google Drive in a doc, and then we'll move them into GitHub issues or whatnot.
I think Thomas is alluding to maybe we can have a temporary GitHub home and then move to an official one. Maybe.
We can create our own repository.
Try to say.
We can create our own repository, common repository, right? Public repository for ourselves outside of CCC till we get a home in CCC in 3 to 6 months. Is that fair enough?
A SIG can be created in days. I mean, but sure, yeah, we can. Like,
we
let's move.
We need to use GitHub, because otherwise we will not lose track of issues, discussions.
I like progress over process. So go for it. Create one, share it to the mailing list. Let's start using it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. And please subscribe to the channel as well on Slack.
All right.
Yeah.
For next time, like just wrapping this up, for next time, take a look at the charter, take a look at the gap analysis for Whimsy and the Peter, please help me out here. I wrote a gap analysis on Spiffy, but I'm not authoritative. You are, so feel free to critique. Maybe and let's reconvene next week. We need to reschedule this meeting, and please respond to the Google Doodle thing, so we pick the next meeting time.
Mark, if there's a link somewhere to this gap analysis,
I'll send you everything you need on LinkedIn through a private email.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. Don't forget the doodle so we can schedule the good meeting time.
The doodle was where? Sorry?
It was sent to the mailing list.
Mailing list.
Okay, the mailing list. Okay,
yeah. If you don't know where to find stuff, send me a message and I'll promptly respond. I'll get you straight.
Yeah, I have a CCC folder, so probably doodle poll for TWI. I got it. Last email on this. Yeah. I just sorted it away.
See you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.